Peace to everybody. This is about Andrew Ridgeley, reminisces about George Michael and the meteoric rise of Wham. And as you can see here, here's Andrew Ridgeley with George Michael when they was young. Warning: reading Andrew Ridgeley's memoir of Wham, George Michael and Me may send you straight down a YouTube or Spotify rabbit hole. It's a reminder that the pair, in a mere 4 years, churned out an astounding number of hits. Among them, Wake Me Up Before You Go Go, Edge of Heaven, Last Christmas, Everything She Wants, Careless Whisper, and Freedom. So this is what the warning is going to be about Andrew Ridgeley's memoir of Wham, George Michael and Me. From 1982 to its final concert at Wembley Stadium in 1986, the high-spirited pop of Wham provided much-needed escapism from the misery of record unemployment in England. As Ridgeley writes, everything looked effortlessly fun for us because it was effortlessly fun. They were wizards with a pop hook. They were young and handsome. They were agile dancers capable of plausibly wearing tiny fila shorts, an early sponsorship deal, and cropped shirts. So from 1982 to his final concert in Wembley Stadium in 1986, they were the spirited pop duo of Wham, provided much needed escapism. They were young and handsome during that time. They were agile dancers capable of plausibly wearing tiny fila shorts and cropped shirts during that time. Wham! George Michael and Me is the first time Ridgeley has written about his partnership, professional and personal, with Michael since his bandmate's shocking, untimely death at 53 on Christmas Day in 2016. So this is the first time that Andrew Ridgeley has written about his partnership, professional and personal, about George Michael. So he had a lot to say about George Michael, but nothing bad though. Of course, they were bandmates together for a while, and then after their final concert or whatever, they decided to go separate on their own. And of course, George Michael had died on Christmas Day in 2016. Those in search of exclusive tidbits will be disappointed. The nearest Ridgeley comes to dropping any bombs and carping about Michael's obsession with his hair, described here as an uncontrollable mass of wiry fritz in the humidity. George bleached, teased, and blow-dried to such an extent that friends who caught a glimpse of him on the front page of tabloids sometimes mistook him for Princess Diana. Alright, so George Michael had done a lot of things with his hair. He frizzed it, bleached it, teased it, blow-dried it, everything you could think of. But of course, when the fans had caught a glimpse of him on the front page of tabloids, sometimes they mistook him for Princess Diana. What emerges instead is a tender, admiring tribute to Michael, whom Ridgeley repeatedly calls his best friend. The tone is affable. Chapter 12, for instance, is titled Party Nights and Neon Lights and Light on Analysis. Few observations obtain more gravitas than if somebody had told me when I was 12 that one day I'd be appearing on Top of the Pops. I'd have thought they were completely nuts, but for fans of 80s pop, it's an engaging, breezy read. So, yes, so during that time, originally repeatedly calls his best friend. So that's who George Michael was to Andrew Ridgeley. He was his best friend. That's all it was. Of course, chapter 12, for instance, is titled Party Nights and Neon Lights and Night on Analysis. Of course, there was a few observations obtained by more gravitas then. And if somebody had told me when I was 12 that one day I'd be appearing on top of the pops. So they did. They flew to the top charts during that time with the music that they had. The two met in 1975, writes Ridgeley, when a new boy arrived at Bushy Med's comprehensive school in Hertfordshire, England. Awkward, chubby, and wearing a pair of oversized glasses, the boy blushed in mortification as the teacher mangled his Greek name of Georgios Kyriakos Panagiotou. So the teacher teased George Michael about his names, and it was real embarrassing, of course. They both met in 1975, Andrew Ridgeley and George Michael. And of course, George Michael was a new kid at the school, at the Bushy Men's Comprehensive School in Hertfordshire, England, during that time. Ridgeley was assigned as Panagioto's mentor, and in uncomplicated but deep teen boy friendship bloomed, united by a shared love of Queen, David Bowie, and Joy Division, Monty Python sketches, and juvenile humor. Ridgeley gave him the lifelong nickname of Yog, derived from the pronunciation of his name as Yogyo. So Ridgeley was assigned to George Michael, of course, to help him out with his name and that, because George Michael didn't know how to pronounce his name. And of course, like I said, his teacher was teasing him about him. They were teen boy friendship bloomed, united by a shared love of Queen, David Bowie, and Joy Division, Monty Python sketches, and juvenile humor, of course. Originally gave him the lifelong name of Yog, derived from the pronunciation of his name as Yorgo. They also shared a bond as the sons of immigrant fathers. Michael's dad was a sternly traditional Greek Cypriot who changed his first name from Kyriakos to Jack. When he moved to London, Ridgeley's Egypt-born father changed his surname from Zachariah to Ridgeley after seeing Ridgeley Gardens on a street sign and deciding that it sounded properly English. So they both had the fathers of both of these young men. They had changed their names. Of course, George Michael's father was Greek, and Andrew Ridgeley's father was Egyptian. So they changed it from Andrew Ridgeley's father's name from Zachariah to Ridgeley. So that's who Andrew Ridgeley's father was. It was Zachariah at first, then he changed it to Ridgeley. George Michael's name, it is an unusual name. It's Cypriot, to change his name from Kyriakos to Jack. So Jack and Ridgeley were more popular English because of the names that the fathers were given when they were born. The rise of Wham was met meteoric. At 16, the two music obsessives were writing songs and recording demos in the modest house where Ridgeley lived with his parents. At 18, they formed Wham. By 19, they'd landed a record contract. So yeah, so it was the rise of Wham during that time. It was meteoric. At 16, the two music obsessives were writing songs, they were recording their demos. And of course, Ridgely lived with his parents. At age 18, they formed Wham. By 19, they landed a record contract. So they did all this in a matter of a few years. Before the release of their debut album, Fantastic, they've decided that Michael should take full creative reign and write and arrange their songs. Ridgely's reaction was typically even keeled. The decision still smarted a little, but it was the right one. He writes, George was so clearly developing into a writer of rare ability. I clearly couldn't match him. So yeah, so originally was reaction was typically even killed, but he knew it was the right thing that George Michael would do all the songs. Um, he writes George was so clearly developing into a writer of rare ability. I clearly couldn't match him. So there was no way that Andrew Ridgeley was going to match him because of the songs that George Michael was doing. For Michael, by then he had, like his father, changed his name. Songwriting seemed to have become the vehicle through which he could draw out the person he wanted to be, writes Ridgeley. Despite his glorious voice and his uncanny ability to deliver pop hooks beneath the surface, George was still struggling with his looks, his weight, and his self-image. The new character gave him a layer of psychological armor. So George Michael was still struggling with his weight, his looks, and everything else. And this is what Andrew Ridgeley is writing in his memoir. Um, of course, George was still struggling with his looks, his weight, and his self-image on top of it. The new character gave him a layer of psychological armor, so George Michael had to change everything about himself. And of course, as you can see here in the screenshot, is Andrew Ridgeley, of the one half of Wham. This is George Michael's best friend for so many years. It's always will be George Michael's best friend. Now that they seem to have discussed this, their friendship during the band and afterward was joke why and bloke why when it came to romance. Neither of us have ever confided in the other, Ridgely recalls. That's just not what our friendship was about. So they never confided in one another when it came to romance at all. They just kept it secret. And of course, that's not. And of course, Andrew Ridgeley is saying that's just not what our friendship was about. So and he's right. It's not what it was about. It was more likely about all the music. That's all it was. But when it came to romance, no. They never discussed it or anything like that. While filming the video for Club Tropicana in Ibiza, Fun and Sunshine, There's Enough for Everyone, Michael called Ridgeley into his room and announced that he was gay. Ridgeley was unfazed. I wanted him to be happy. So George Michael called Andrew Ridgeley into his room, and he told his best friend that he was gay. Ridgeley was unfazed, so he wasn't surprised at all. So, and of course, Andrew Ridgeley is like, okay, and it didn't faze him at all. It really didn't, because Andrew Ridgeley is the type of person to understand what his best friend George Michael was going through. But the era was less queer friendly, and Michael had who had grown fierce ferociously ambitious, decided that coming out was a career risk he couldn't take. He ultimately came out in 1998. It helped that Ridgely was cultivating an image as Randy Andy, the promiscuous club hound. I'd been painted as the sinner, but the situation suited Michael just fine, writes Ridgely. While the press were distracted by me, they were blind to the truth about his sexuality. And of course, the media, yeah, they just bypass everything. They don't care. Because they were all focused on Andrew Ridgely. Um, George Michael, he was he came out with it in 1998. Andrew Ridgely saying that it helped that Ridgely was cultivating an image as Randy Andy, the promiscuous club hound. He says that I've been painted as the sinner, but the situation suited Michael just fine. So it suited George Michael just fine because he didn't want, even though it was a career risk, but still, George Michael still came out and told Andrew Ridgely of who he is. 3 studio albums later, Wham was done. We were a band built on the idea of youth and exuberance, writes Ridgely. There was no way we could stay kids forever. And it's true, you don't stay kids forever, you're growing. And that's what they were doing. They were growing. Of course, 3 studio albums later, Wham was done. Of course, they were built on ideas for the youth and exuberance or whatever, and there was no way they could stay kids forever. Now, kids, they pretty much grow when they are doing things. It's learning. After the breakup, Michael zoomed to superstardom with the release of 1987's Faith, while Ridgely settled into his identity as the other guy in Wham. He did a stint of race car driving, released a solo album that barely charted, and married in a match made in pop heaven. Bananarama's Kieran Woodward. His bio says he now pursues a variety of interests. So, Wham broke up. Michael zoomed into stardom with the release of 1987's Faith. So that was the first solo album that George Michael had done, while Ridgely settled into his identity as the other guy in Wham. So Andrew Ridgely was just the other guy in Wham. That's all he was. He did a stint of race car driving, released a solo album that barely charted, and married. So Andrew Ridgely is not gay. Andrew Ridgely married a woman from Bananarama named Kieran Woodward. So this is why George Michael and Andrew Ridgely were best friends. There was nothing else between them. The book ends with Ridgely texting his old friend on Christmas Day 2016, wishing him a happy holiday and thanking him for the annual Christmas hamper of treats that Michael always sent. Soon afterward, Michael's sister phoned with the devastating news that he had died. Ridgely, blindsided, doubled over in grief and began to sob. So Andrew Ridgely did text his friend George Michael on Christmas Day to wish him a happy holiday, and thanking him for the annual Christmas hamper of treats that George Michael has always sent to him. But George Michael passed away, unfortunately, and George Michael's sister, she phoned Andrew Ridgeley and told him that he had passed away. And of course, Ridgeley was blindsided, doubled over in grief, and began to sob. So he didn't even see that coming at all. These days, Ridgeley will come across something that takes him back to the early days and find himself overcome with nostalgia, not for the screaming girls and the stadium shows, the tumult and the palaver, but for the person has lost. I've not had as strong a bond with any other chum since then. Ridgely writes wistfully, I've discovered that type of intensity is harder to rediscover as you get older. And yes, it is true. Ridgely never had another best friend like George Michael. They were always best friends. And of course, Ridgely will come across something that takes him back to the early days and find himself overcome with nostalgia. And it's not for the screaming girls, of course, but when you reminisce back on the early days, yeah, it reminds you of all the fun that you have. And this is what Ridgely was doing, was remembering all the fun they had and everything else, even when they met in school. Some of Michael's fans will likely wish that this memoir was more revealing, but others will be grateful that their idol had a steadfast friend like Ridgely. Yeah, so fans, they will likely wish that the memoir was more revealing, and of course others will be grateful that their idol had a steadfast friend like Ridgely. So, and it's a very interesting memoir, but I don't know if I would read it though, but it could be interesting. But it all depends on where it's at, where you could buy it at or anything. Janice Dunn's latest book is How Not to Hate Your Husband After Kids. I don't care about that. Wham, George Michael and Me. And of course, it's a memoir by Andrew Ridgeley. And of course, Dutton is, and it's $28. So, this is an interesting read if you want. I don't know if you could find it somewhere online or in bookstores or not, because it doesn't say. But Andrew Ridgeley and George Michael, they were best of friends and always will be, even though George Michael is no longer here, but still, they were best friends. Leave your comments below. I am out.